At the will reading, the estate lawyer looked me in the eye and announced my inheritance: a dilapidated house and a single envelope containing exactly $15. The entire room erupted into cruel laughter. My father sneered and told me I had wasted my entire life caring for a broke old man, only to receive a literal pile of junk in return. I did not scream or argue. I simply smiled, placed the cash in my purse, and walked out the door. What they did not know was that the serial numbers printed on those two crisp bills were about to unlock a devastating family secret, a hidden truth that would systematically destroy their fake empire and eventually leave my arrogant father begging on his knees. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. I am Kendra, 35 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life building a successful career as a forensic accountant while remaining the designated disappointment of my family. Growing up in our sprawling estate in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, I was constantly reminded that I did not fit the pristine image of Black excellence my parents so desperately wanted to project to their country club friends. My father, Reginald, is a 62-year-old patriarch who runs a highly lucrative logistics firm. He measures a person's worth strictly by their bank account balance and the brand of watch on their wrist. He has always been arrogant, wearing custom-tailored suits and carrying himself with a heavy sense of superiority. More than anything, he deeply resented his own father, my grandpa Elijah, for choosing to live a humble, modest life in a historically Black neighborhood in East Atlanta rather than parading his wealth around the city. My mother, Cynthia, is 60 years old and the ultimate enabler. She values appearances, high society connections, and her collection of diamond jewelry above the emotional well-being of her own children. Then there is my sister Jasmine, who is 32 and the undisputed golden child of the family. Jasmine is spoiled, entirely dependent on her father's money, yet she projects the carefully curated image of a self-made luxury real estate influencer to her thousands of followers. She is married to Trent, a 34-year-old white commercial real estate developer. Trent is a sleazy opportunist who actively makes his living by gentrifying historically Black neighborhoods, buying up family homes for pennies on the dollar and tearing them down to build overpriced luxury condos. And then there was Grandpa Elijah. He was 82 years old when he passed away, and he was my absolute rock. While my parents and sister treated me like an embarrassing outsider because I preferred reading financial ledgers over attending society galas, Grandpa Elijah actually saw me. He lived modestly in his old Victorian home, wearing worn-out sweaters and pretending to be just a poor old man living on a fixed income. But he was secretly a financial genius who saw right through my family's insatiable greed. He recognized my sharp mind and quiet ambition, and he loved me unconditionally. I spent every Sunday of my adult life driving to his house, taking him to church, and sitting on his creaky front porch drinking sweet tea while we talked about life. My family constantly mocked me for wasting my time with him, claiming I was throwing away my weekends on a bitter old man who had nothing to offer. The truth of their cruelty was never more apparent than on the morning we gathered for the reading of his will. The air inside the mahogany-paneled office of Mr. Sterling, Grandpa Elijah's estate lawyer, felt thick and suffocating. The room smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and the heavy cologne my father always wore to assert his dominance in professional settings. We sat around a massive oak conference table. My father sat at the head of the table, his arms crossed over his chest, projecting an air of bored impatience. My mother sat beside him, nervously adjusting her diamond necklace and checking her reflection in her phone screen. Jasmine and Trent sat across from me. Jasmine was actually sipping a mimosa she had brought into the office in a designer tumbler, looking completely disinterested in the solemnity of the occasion. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, dressed in a sharp conservative business suit, my hands folded tightly in my lap as I braced myself for the inevitable family drama. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses, breaking the heavy silence in the room. He began reading the legal document in a measured, monotonous voice. The distribution of assets was swift and entirely predictable. To my father, Reginald Grandpa Elijah left the full and complete ownership of the logistics firm. My father already ran the company, but Grandpa had retained a controlling share on paper. Now it belonged entirely to my father. Reginald nodded once, a smug expression of satisfaction settling over his features, as if he had just closed a routine business deal. To my mother, Cynthia Grandpa left the entirety of his liquid cash accounts. My mother let out a soft sigh of relief, likely already calculating how many designer bags and country club fees those accounts would cover. Then Mr. Sterling turned the page to address my sister. To Jasmine, Grandpa left a massive trust fund carefully structured to provide her with a hefty monthly allowance. Jasmine actually squealed with delight, raising her mimosa tumbler in a mock toast and leaning over to kiss Trent on the cheek. They were all getting exactly what they expected: wealth status and the validation of their own greed. Finally, Mr. Sterling looked down at the last page of the document, and I saw a brief flicker of hesitation in his eyes before he looked up to meet my gaze. To his eldest granddaughter Kendra, he read aloud, "Elijah leaves the entirety of his residential property located in East Atlanta, along with the contents of the attached envelope." Mr. Sterling reached across the polished oak table and handed me a small, slightly yellowed paper envelope. It felt incredibly light in my hands. I carefully opened the flap and looked inside. There were exactly two bills, one $10 bill and one $5 bill, $15 in total. For a fraction of a second, the room was completely silent. Then the explosion happened. Jasmine literally snorted her mimosa, sputtering and coughing as she burst into loud, uncontrollable laughter. She slapped the table, pointing at the two bills in my hand. My mother covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent, mocking amusement. But it was my father who delivered the most vicious blow. Reginald slammed his heavy hand down on the mahogany desk, his booming laughter echoing off the wood-paneled walls. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with absolute contempt and cruel triumph. "You spent every single Sunday taking that broke old man to church," Reginald sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You wasted your youth sitting on his rotting porch listening to his ridiculous stories. And what did you get for all that pathetic loyalty? A crumbling, dilapidated house in a bad neighborhood and bus fare." He laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that made my chest tight. "You call yourself a forensic accountant, Kendra. Tell me, what is the exact return on investment for a pile of junk and $15? The humiliation burned hot in my cheeks, but I refused to let them see me break. I had spent 35 years practicing the art of stoicism in the face of their emotional abuse. I did not yell. I did not cry. I kept my face completely neutral, staring directly into my father's eyes without blinking. I felt the familiar weight of their collective disdain, the same weight I had felt when they refused to pay for my college tuition because I chose to attend a state school instead of a prestigious, historically black college like Jasmine did. They had always punished me for refusing to conform to their shallow expectations. Trent leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and surveying me with the sleazy, predatory smile he reserved for vulnerable property owners. He cleared his throat, attempting to sound generous, while dripping with condescension. "Look, Kendra," he began smoothly, "we all know you cannot afford the property taxes on a rundown Victorian home in East Atlanta. That neighborhood is an absolute eyesore. But I am a generous guy. My development firm is looking to clear out some of those old lots. I will take that dump off your hands for a few $1,000s just to do you a favor. I can have the demolition crew tear it down by next month. It will save you the headache, and you can use the cash to pay off whatever debts you have from your little accounting business." My mother sighed loudly, reaching up to adjust her diamond necklace again, shaking her head in theatrical disappointment. "If you had just gone to Spelman College like your sister instead of a state school," she said, her voice laced with pity and judgment, "maybe you would have made the right high society connections. You would not be sitting here relying on your brother-in-law to bail you out of a terrible inheritance. You should listen to Trent, Kendra. Just let him handle the property. You have always struggled with making smart business decisions." Their words were designed to make me feel small, incompetent, and utterly dependent on their grace. But they were operating on outdated information. They still saw me as the awkward 20-year-old girl who drove a cheap beaten-up sedan and lived in a tiny apartment. They had absolutely no idea that my forensic accounting firm had been completely debt-free for 6 years. They did not know that I managed accounts for multinational corporations, or that my personal net worth far exceeded the facade of wealth Jasmine projected on social media. They did not know me at all. I looked at Trent, noting the slight sweat on his brow and the subtle fraying at the cuffs of his supposedly expensive suit. I knew exactly how overleveraged his commercial real estate development company really was, but this was not the moment to show my hand. The best way to win against a room full of narcissists is to let them believe they have already defeated you. I quietly slid the $10 bill and the $5 bill out of the envelope. I smoothed them out perfectly flat, then deliberately folded them and placed them inside my designer leather purse. I stood up from the conference table, taking my time to button the front of my tailored blazer. I looked at Trent, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I offered them a tight, polite smile that did not reach my eyes. "Thank you for the generous offer, Trent," I said softly, my voice completely steady. "But I think I will hold on to Grandpa Elijah's pile of junk just a little bit longer. Good day to all of you." I turned on my heel and walked out of the office. I could hear my father scoffing behind me, muttering something about my stubborn ignorance, and Jasmine complaining that my presence was always a buzzkill. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, severing their toxic voices from my immediate reality. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway of the law firm, my heels sinking into the plush fabric, maintaining my rigid posture, until I finally reached the elevator. When I stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun and walked across the asphalt parking lot to my car, the adrenaline that had kept me perfectly composed finally began to wear off. The intense heat of the Georgia summer hit me like a physical wave as I unlocked my car and sank into the driver's seat. I closed the door, shutting out the noise of the traffic on the street and gripping the leather steering wheel tightly. My chest heaved as I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to dispel the lingering sting of my family's laughter. They had always known exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make me feel like the unwanted outcast. I sat in the sweltering silence of my car for several minutes, staring blankly at the dashboard. Why had Grandpa Elijah done this? He was not a cruel man. He knew my family would tear me apart for inheriting so little while they walked away with millions. He knew the verbal abuse I would endure in that room. He was a brilliant, calculated thinker. There had to be a reason. He never did anything without a specific, intentional purpose. I reached into my purse and pulled out the 2 bills. I held them up to the sunlight filtering through my windshield. They were not normal currency. They felt different against my fingertips, slightly thicker and unusually crisp. I examined the $10 bill first, then the $5 bill. They were completely pristine, uncirculated silver certificates dating back to 1953. The blue ink of the seals was vibrant and flawless. But it was not the age or the condition of the bills that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the serial numbers printed across the face of the currency. I stared at the sequence of letters and numbers, my heart beginning to race with a sudden, overwhelming realization. The serial number on the $10 bill read A482911B. The serial number on the $5 bill read C735042D. A memory struck me with the force of lightning. I was 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the braided rug in Grandpa Elijah's study. The room smelled of old pine pipe tobacco and peppermint candies. He was sitting at his massive, heavy oak desk, writing numbers on a piece of scratch paper. He called me over and handed me the paper. He looked at me with an intensity that demanded my complete attention. "Kendra, my smart girl," he had said, his deep voice serious and quiet. "I need you to look at these numbers. I need you to memorize them, put them deep inside that brilliant brain of yours and never forget them. Promise me." I had promised him. We spent an hour practicing until I could recite the entire sequence backward and forward without missing a single digit. When I finally mastered it, he smiled, handed me a peppermint, and whispered a secret that I had not understood until this exact moment. "One day, Kendra, When the vultures try to pick your bones clean, this sequence will open the real door. You are the only one I trust to understand the math. I looked back down at the silver certificates trembling in my hands. The numbers were an exact perfect match to the sequence I had burned into my memory 25 years ago. My father thought I had inherited a rotting porch and bus fare. Trent thought he could steal my property for a fraction of its worth. My mother and sister thought I was a pathetic poor dropout who desperately needed their charity. They were all wrong. Grandpa Elijah had not left me $15. He had left me a map, a key, and a loaded weapon. He had known exactly what my father would do, exactly how arrogant and blind Reginald's greed would make him. And he had chosen me, the forensic accountant they all despised, to be the architect of their downfall. I carefully placed the silver certificates back into my purse, a slow, genuine smile finally spreading across my face. The sting of their laughter was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I started the engine of my car, the air conditioning blasting cool air over my face. I did not drive back to my office. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, heading straight for the historic tree-lined streets of East Atlanta. It was time to visit my new pile of junk. It was time to open the real door. The cruel laughter echoing off the mahogany walls slowly died down, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence. Trent shifted in his chair, the expensive leather squeaking loudly in the quiet room. He shot a quick, calculating look at Jasmine, who was busy reapplying her lip gloss before fixing his eyes entirely on me. Trent always carried a deeply ingrained savior complex. He was a slick commercial real estate developer who had married into a prominent black family and suddenly behaved as though he had the divine right to dictate our entire legacy. He leaned across the polished wood of Mr. Sterling's desk, steepling his fingers together. "Look!" Kendra Trent started using that smooth, patronizing tone he always reserved for people he firmly believed were beneath him. "Your dad makes a highly valid point. You simply cannot afford the property taxes on a rundown Victorian home in East Atlanta. That entire neighborhood is an absolute eyesore right now. It is full of crime falling apart, and frankly it is holding up the real economic progress of the city." He paused, flashing a bright empty smile that did not reach his eyes. "But I am a generous guy. My development firm is currently looking to clear out some of those old blighted lots to make way for modern luxury condominiums. I will take that dump off your hands for $5,000 cash, just to do you a personal favor. I can have my demolition crew out there by next month to tear the whole thing down. It will save you a massive headache, and you can use the cash to pay off whatever debts you have from your little accounting side hustle." Before I could even process the absolute audacity of his lowball offer, my mother sighed. It was a heavy theatrical sound deliberately designed to draw all the attention in the room directly to her. Cynthia sat perfectly straight, her manicured fingers reaching up to adjust the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She looked at me with a potent mixture of pity and profound exhaustion. "If you had just gone to Spelman like your sister instead of insisting on that state school, maybe things would be different for you right now," she said, her voice dripping with maternal disappointment. Spelman was the ultimate status symbol in her world, the absolute pinnacle of black excellence, and my rejection of it was a slight she had never forgiven. "You would have built the right high society connections. You would know how to navigate these elite financial circles. You would not be sitting here today relying on your brother-in-law to bail you out of a terrible, worthless inheritance." She waved her hand dismissively toward the $15 resting on the table. "Just let Trent handle the property, Kendra. You have always struggled with making smart business decisions. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the deed over to his company and walk away gracefully." Their words were perfectly designed to make me feel small, incompetent, and utterly dependent on their supposed grace. But they were operating on outdated, entirely fictional information. They looked at me and saw the awkward 20-year-old girl who drove a beaten-up sedan and stubbornly refused to conform to their country club standards. They saw a permanent failure. They had absolutely no idea that I ran a highly successful forensic accounting firm. They did not know that I spent my days tracking corporate embezzlement and unraveling complex financial fraud for multinational clients. I looked closely at Trent, noting the slight sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead and the way his foot tapped rapidly under the table. My trained eye caught the subtle fraying at the cuffs of his supposedly custom suit. I knew exactly how the commercial real estate market was performing in the city, and I could smell an over-leveraged, desperate developer from a mile away. Trent did not want to do me a favor. Trent was bleeding money and needed a cheap piece of land to flip quickly to appease his angry investors. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the satisfaction of a highly emotional outburst. That was exactly what Jasmine was waiting for, sipping her mimosa with a cruel smirk, hoping I would break down crying so she could call me unstable. Instead, I reached out and picked up the $10 bill and the $5 bill. The paper felt unusually crisp and thick against my fingertips. I smoothed them out perfectly flat on the mahogany table, drawing every eye in the room to my deliberate movements. Then I folded the money carefully and slid it deep into the inner pocket of my designer leather purse. I stood up, taking my time to button the front of my tailored blazer. I looked directly at Trent, watching his confident smile falter for a fraction of a second under my unwavering gaze. Then I looked at my mother, and finally my father. I offered them a tight, polite smile that completely failed to reach my eyes. "Thank you for the incredibly generous offer, Trent." I said, my voice quiet but laced with absolute steel. "But I think I will hold on to Grandpa Elijah's pile of junk just a little bit longer. Good day to all of you." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. I did not look back. Behind me, the shocked silence shattered. My father scoffed loudly, muttering something to Mr. Sterling about my stubborn, endless ignorance. Jasmine groaned loudly, complaining to Trent that my presence was always such a depressing buzzkill and that I was ruining her celebratory mood. I reached the heavy mahogany double doors of the office, grasped the brass handle, and pulled it open. I stepped out into the plush-carpeted hallway and let the door click firmly shut behind me, cleanly severing their toxic voices from my reality. I kept my posture completely rigid, walking down the long corridor toward the elevators. My heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, a steady, calm beat that betrayed none of the intense storm raging inside my chest. I pressed the call button and waited, watching the digital numbers slowly descend. When the polished steel doors finally slid open, I stepped inside the empty car and pressed the button for the ground floor lobby. The doors closed, sealing me in absolute silence, leaving my family and their cruel laughter far above me. The heavy mahogany doors of the law firm clicked shut behind me, completely severing the toxic sound of my family's laughter from my reality. I kept my posture perfectly rigid as I walked down the long corridor and took the elevator to the ground floor. When I stepped out into the blazing Georgia afternoon, the thick humidity hit me instantly, but I barely felt the heat. I walked across the sprawling asphalt parking lot toward my unassuming sedan, a practical vehicle my father had always sneered at, entirely oblivious to the fact that I had purchased it in cash straight off the lot. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The sudden absolute silence inside the cabin was deafening. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The flawless stoicism I had maintained in Mr. Sterling's office finally cracked, giving way to a violent tremor of adrenaline leaving my system. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the seat, forcing myself to take deep, measured breaths. They had tried to break me again. My mother with her condescending pity, Jasmine with her mocking snorts, Trent with his predatory lowball offer, and my father with his absolute booming contempt. They had synchronized their cruelty, assuming I would crumble under the weight of their collective disdain. They still saw me as the frightened 20-year-old girl they had cut off for refusing to play by their country club rules. But I was a 35-year-old forensic accountant who spent her days unraveling the complex financial lies of corporate executives. I was not someone who broke easily. I opened my eyes and reached for my leather purse resting on the passenger seat. I unclasped the brass hardware and pulled out the small, slightly yellowed envelope Mr. Sterling had handed me. It felt practically weightless in my hands, a stark and humiliating contrast to the multi-million-dollar assets my father and sister had just walked away with. I tipped the envelope upside down and slid the two bills out, laying them perfectly flat on the center console. The air conditioning kicked in, sending a chill over my damp forehead, but my focus was entirely on the money. I stared at the cash, waiting for the punchline of my grandfather's final joke to reveal itself. But Grandpa Elijah did not play cruel jokes. Every single action he took in his life was deliberate, calculated, and heavily layered with purpose. I picked up the $10 bill, holding it closer to the sunlight streaming through the windshield. The paper felt distinctly different against my fingertips. It lacked the familiar soft, worn texture of circulated currency. It was thicker, stiffer, with a specific tactile quality that instantly triggered my professional instincts. I looked closely at the seal printed on the right side of Hamilton's portrait. It was not the standard green ink used on modern money. It was a vibrant, flawless blue. I looked down at the series date printed near the bottom edge. It read 1953. I quickly picked up the $5 bill and found the exact same vibrant blue seal accompanied by the exact same year. These were not random pieces of cash pulled from a wallet. They were uncirculated silver certificates preserved in absolute pristine condition for decades. My heart began to beat a little faster against my ribs. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on finding the hidden story behind the numbers, following the obscure paper trails that greedy men desperately tried to bury. I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto the serial number printed in bold blue ink across the top right corner of the $10 bill. It read, a 482911B. My breath suddenly hitched in my throat. A strange sensation like a sudden drop in cabin pressure seized my chest. I snatched up the $5 bill, my hands now visibly trembling. The serial number read C735042D. I stared at the sequence of letters and numbers, my mind spinning wildly as the characters locked into a deeply buried groove in my memory. The sweltering interior of my car completely faded away immediately, replaced by the cool, comforting shadow of Grandpa Elijah's study. I was 10 years old again, sitting cross-legged on the braided rug that covered his scuffed hardwood floor. The room was a quiet sanctuary smelling of old pine cherry pipe tobacco and the sharp, sweet scent of the peppermint candies he always kept in a crystal jar on his desk. He was sitting in his heavy leather chair holding a piece of scratch paper filled with a long, continuous string of alphanumeric characters. The rest of the family was outside by the pool, my father loudly bragging about a new shipping contract, while my mother orchestrated a flawless barbecue for her high society friends. Grandpa had pulled me away from the noisy, superficial gathering, claiming he needed my help with a special math puzzle. I remembered the intense, piercing focus in his dark eyes as he leaned over the heavy oak desk and handed me the piece of paper. "Kendra, my brilliant girl," he had whispered, his deep voice rumbling with a seriousness that commanded my absolute attention. "Your father thinks wealth is something you wear on your wrist or park in your driveway. He thinks numbers are just a shallow way to keep score against his neighbors. But numbers are a language. They hold secrets, they build fortresses, and they expose the truth. I need you to look at this sequence on this paper. I need you to memorize it. Put it so deep inside your mind that no one can ever take it from you." I had spent the next 2 hours sitting on that braided rug whispering the characters over and over again until they were permanently etched into my brain. A 482911B, C735042D. When I finally stood up and recited the sequence flawlessly back to him, he leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. It was a proud, highly conspiratorial smile. He reached into the crystal jar, handed me a peppermint, and tapped his temple with his index finger. "One day, Kendra, when the vultures start circling and try to pick your bones clean, this sequence is going to open the real door. You are the only one in this entire family I trust to understand the math." The memory dissolved, bringing me sharply back to the present moment in the humid parking lot. I looked down at the 2 silver certificates resting in my lap. The sequence printed on the currency was a perfect, exact match to the numbers I had memorized 25 years ago. For over 2 decades, I had carried those numbers in my head, never knowing what they meant, assuming it was just a mental exercise my grandfather used to sharpen my memory. But he had been preparing me. He knew exactly what kind of man my father was, and he knew exactly what my father would eventually become. He knew that when the time came, my family would blind themselves with their own massive arrogance, fighting over the obvious flashy wealth while completely dismissing the quiet, unassuming granddaughter sitting in the corner. My father thought I had inherited a rotting porch and bus fare. Trent thought he could swoop in and steal my property for a tiny fraction of its true value because he assumed I was desperate and financially illiterate. My mother and sister thought I was a pathetic, bitter dropout who needed their pity to survive in the world. They were all fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. Grandpa Elijah had not left me a pile of junk and $15. He had left me a map, a key, and a loaded weapon. He had chosen me to be the architect of their ultimate reckoning. I carefully slid the silver certificates back into the envelope and tucked them safely inside the zippered pocket of my purse. The suffocating heat of the car no longer bothered me. The lingering sting of their mockery was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, calculating clarity. I started the engine, the low hum of the motor matching the newfound energy coursing through my veins. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the law firm parking lot, merging into the heavy city traffic. I was not going back to my accounting firm. I pointed my car toward the historic tree-lined streets of East Atlanta. It was time to visit my new pile of junk. It was time to find out exactly what door Grandpa Elijah wanted me to open. The drive from the sterile corporate law firm in Buckhead to East Atlanta is a journey between two entirely different worlds. As I navigate my car down the familiar streets, the reality of the neighborhood comes into sharp focus. This area was once the thriving, beating heart of Black working-class families, a community built on deep solidarity and shared history. Now it is an active battlefield. Towering construction cranes loom like metal vultures against the bright Georgia sky. Bulldozers idle menacingly on freshly cleared dirt lots where historic family homes stood just a month ago. Sleek, overpriced, soulless modern condominiums are violently wedging their way between 70-year-old brick bungalows. This is exactly why Trent was sweating in that law office. He does not look at these streets and see a community. He sees a heavily subsidized gold mine, and Grandpa Elijah's property is the last major stronghold on a rapidly gentrifying block holding up his master plan. I pull into the cracked concrete driveway of the old Victorian house. From the curb, the property perfectly plays the part of a decaying relic. The white paint is peeling off the wood siding in long, brittle strips. The front porch sags slightly on the left side, and the front lawn is a wild, untamed patch of overgrown Bermuda grass and weeds. But looking closer, the foundation is solid, thick stone. The roof shingles are completely intact and relatively new. Grandpa meticulously maintained the structural integrity of this house while deliberately allowing the cosmetic exterior to weather, feeding the exact illusion of poverty my father and brother-in-law fell for. I walk up the wooden steps, my heels echoing in the quiet afternoon air, and unlock the heavy oak front door. As I step inside, the immediate sensory shift hits me like a physical embrace. The stifling, oppressive summer heat is instantly replaced by a cool, deep stillness. The house smells exactly as it always has, a rich, comforting, heavily nostalgic blend of aged pine floorboards, lemon oil polish, and the sharp, sweet scent of peppermint candies. It is the smell of absolute safety, a stark contrast to the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of the law office I just left. I do not linger in the foyer. I walk directly down the main hallway, bypassing the formal parlor and heading straight for his study at the back of the house. The study is a meticulous, highly organized space, completely contradicting the chaotic appearance of the front yard. Tall wooden bookshelves line every single wall, packed tightly with thick financial ledgers, historical biographies, and complex economic theory texts. My father always arrogantly assumed Grandpa spent his days sitting in a recliner watching daytime television. He never once bothered to walk into this room and look at the actual titles on these shelves. I moved toward the massive antique oak desk situated squarely in the center of the room. Directly above the desk hangs a large framed architectural grid map of the property drafted back in the 1970s. It breaks the entire house and lot down into precise alphanumerically labeled quadrants. I pull the two 1953 silver certificates from my purse and lay them flat on the smooth, polished surface of the desk. A 482911B, C735042D. I stare at the printed characters overlaying the memory of the 10-year-old girl sitting on this very rug, with the adult forensic accountant standing here today. Grandpa did not just make me memorize a random string of digits for a mental exercise. He taught me a highly specific coordinate system. The letters and the first digits correspond perfectly to the axes on the grid map hanging on the wall, a 4 and C7. I reach up and trace my finger across the glass of the frame. A4 intersects with the back right corner of the study. C7 narrows that trajectory down to the exact square foot of floor space located directly beneath the heavy oak desk. I drop to my knees on the braided rug, the rough texture familiar and grounding against my bare skin. I run my hands along the aged pine floorboards beneath the desk, pressing firmly against the solid wood, searching for an anomaly. I push down on the third board from the left. One plank cut slightly shorter than the rest gives way with a soft, distinct mechanical click. I wedge my fingernails into the tight seam and pry the loose floorboard up and away. Beneath the pine, resting inside a carefully constructed hollow cavity, between the floor joists, sits a heavy matte black fireproof lockbox. It is coated in a thin layer of dust, but the digital keypad mounted on the front is modern, sleek, and fully functional. I reach down, gripping the thick metal handle, and haul the heavy box out of the dark cavity, lifting it up and placing it onto the top of the desk. The electronic keypad waits silently for an input, a single red light blinking steadily. The combination. My grandfather's voice echoes clearly in my mind, telling me I was the only one in the family he trusted to understand the math, the only one who actually paid attention. I look back down at the silver certificates resting beside the box. The final piece of the puzzle is the last 6 digits of the serial numbers. I take the final 3 digits from the $10 bill, 911, and combine them with the final 3 digits from the $5 bill, 042. I reach out my finger, hovering over the keypad, and firmly press the sequence, 911042. The keypad emits a single sharp beep that cuts through the heavy silence of the study. A tiny green LED light illuminates on the digital panel, casting a faint glow in the shadowed space beneath the desk. The locking mechanism disengages with a deep, satisfying metallic thud. My fingers slide eagerly under the edge of the heavy matte black lid. My heart is hammering a frantic rhythmic beat against my ribs, and I am holding my breath half a second away from pulling the lid open and discovering what Grandpa Elijah hid for me. Then a massive crash shatters the quiet afternoon. The violent sound of splintering wood echoes sharply down the long hallway. Someone has just kicked open the locked front door of my house. I freeze completely. Heavy, aggressive, masculine footsteps immediately follow the crash, accompanied by the rapid, impatient clicking of stilettos striking the aged pine floorboards. Jasmine's high-pitched, whining voice rings out, complaining bitterly about the dust in the air, demanding to know how long this little errand is going to take. My mind instantly shifts from anticipation into high-gear survival mode. I slam the heavy lid of the lockbox back down. The green light instantly flashes red as the security mechanism re-engages. I shove the heavy metal box deep into the dark cavity between the floor joists, drop the loose pine board perfectly back into its original place, and kick the edge of the braided rug over the seam. I stand up and smooth the front of my blazer just as the heavy footsteps reach the threshold of the study. Trent marches into the room. He does not knock on the doorframe. He does not announce his presence or apologize for breaking the lock on the front door. He walks straight into my grandfather's personal sanctuary, holding a digital laser tape measure pointing a glowing red dot at the far wall and pressing a button. A small electronic chirp confirms his measurement. He is already treating my inherited property like it is an active construction site belonging exclusively to his limited liability company. Jasmine trails closely behind him, dramatically holding a silk designer scarf over her nose and mouth, as if the very oxygen inside the house is contaminated. She is wearing a pristine white sundress and towering strappy wedges, looking completely absurd and entirely out of place standing in the middle of a dusty, unkempt Victorian home. She glares at me with a potent mixture of deep annoyance and utter disgust, treating my presence in my own home as an inconvenient obstacle to her day. Trent finally lowers the laser tape measure and looks at me, flashing that same predatory, deeply disingenuous smile he wore in the lawyer's office just an hour ago. He steps forward deliberately, invading my personal space with the absolute entitlement of a man who has never been told no by anyone in his life. "Look," Kendra Trent says, his voice adopting a faux, sympathetic tone that makes my skin crawl. "Your dad and I had a long talk after you stormed out of the reading today. Reginald does not want you holding up the neighborhood's progress just because you are feeling emotional about this rotting old junk trap. Let us be brutally honest about your situation here. I am currently developing two highly lucrative luxury condominium complexes right down the street. Your grandfather's lot is the last piece of the puzzle holding up my investors." Trent reaches into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket, pulls out a folded legal document, and tosses it carelessly onto the heavy oak desk right over the exact spot where the lockbox is hidden beneath the floorboards. "Sign the deed over to my LLC right now," Trent demands, leaning his hands on the desk and invading my space further. "I will give you $10,000 cash by the end of the business day. 10 grand, Kendra. That is a massive windfall for someone in your financial position. That will easily pay off your little accounting business debts and whatever credit cards you have maxed out. You can finally buy a decent car and stop embarrassing your father every time you pull up to the family estate." Jasmine drops the silk scarf from her face and crosses her arms, nodding in vigorous, self-righteous agreement with her husband. "You should be thanking him on your knees, Kendra." She snaps, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. "Daddy is completely furious that you walked out of Mr. Sterling's office like a petulant child. You are always trying to make a scene and play the perpetual victim. Trent is throwing you a massive lifeline here. Just take the money and go back to your sad little apartment. Stop trying to pretend you know anything about real estate or financial investments. You are going to ruin this neighborhood's property value just by letting this absolute eyesore stand here for another week." I stand perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the oak desk. I look down at the legal document Trent threw down. It is a standard quitclaim deed, printed hastily, but clearly prepared weeks in advance. My father and my brother-in-law had actively conspired to steal this property from me before Grandpa Elijah was even cold in the ground. They assumed I would be so desperate, so entirely broken by the public insult of the $15, that I would eagerly accept the very first scrap of cash thrown my way just to survive. They view my quiet nature as submission. They view my lack of flashy designer clothes as undeniable proof of my poverty. I look back up at Trent, my eyes performing a swift, silent audit of the man standing in front of me. I notice the slight, frantic, rapid blinking of his eyes. I notice the way he shifts his weight nervously from foot to foot. $10,000 is not a generous offer for a prime corner lot in a rapidly gentrifying urban district. $10,000 is a joke. More importantly, $10,000 is the absolute maximum amount of liquid cash a deeply over-leveraged, drowning real estate developer can scrape together on a random Tuesday afternoon. Trent does not have wealthy investors backing him. Trent is completely broke, and he needs my land to save himself from total financial ruin. The heavy oak desk stands solid and unyielding, just like the man who once owned it. Trent leans his weight against the polished wood, completely oblivious to the secret resting mere inches beneath the pine floorboards. He reaches a hand out, gesturing toward the quitclaim deed, fully expecting me to eagerly snatch up his pathetic offer. Instead, I step forward, closing the distance between us. I wedge myself directly between his expensive leather shoes and the desk, using my body as a solid, immovable barrier. I plant my feet firmly on the braided rug, forcing him to take a step back or risk a physical collision. His condescending smile falters, replaced by a flash of genuine confusion. He is not used to women standing their ground, especially not women. His wife has spent decades tearing down. Move aside. Kendra Trent snaps, his smooth facade cracking to reveal the arrogant bully underneath. Stop being stubborn and just sign the paper. You are completely out of your depth here. I do not move a single inch. I look him dead in the eyes, stripping away the polite, quiet sister act I have worn for years. My firm has been completely debt-free for 6 years, Trent. I say, my voice steady and echoing clearly in the quiet study. I do not have little accounting business debts. I run a highly specialized forensic accounting agency. I track missing millions for multinational corporations. I know exactly how to read a balance sheet, and I know exactly how to read a desperate man. Trent stiffens, the laser tape measure in his hand suddenly completely still. I lean in, slightly lowering my voice into a razor-sharp whisper. It is incredibly funny how you magically have $10,000 in cash to toss at me, but my father had to quietly co-sign the mortgage for your supposedly self-funded luxury mansion in Buckhead. The silence that crashes over the room is absolute. Trent's jaw drops, his mouth opening and closing as he struggles to formulate a coherent response. The heavy, nervous sweat on his forehead instantly multiplies. He looks terrified, stripped bare by a truth he thought was a closely guarded secret. I had not even needed to dig deep to find that information. A simple public records search on the county property portal during a slow afternoon at my office had revealed the humiliating truth about his massive, over-leveraged estate. Behind him, Jasmine lets out a sharp, breathless gasp. The pristine, unbothered socialite image shatters instantly. Her face turns a violent, mottled shade of crimson, the red flush clashing horribly with her expensive white sundress. She stomps forward, her wedged heels striking the floorboards like a weapon. "How dare you speak to my husband that way?" Jasmine screams, the shrill pitch of her voice vibrating off the glass frames of Grandpa Elijah's bookshelves. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You are just a jealous, bitter spinster, making up pathetic lies because you are completely miserable." She points a manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with manufactured outrage. "You have always been jealous of me. You are pushing 40, living alone, and driving a pathetic piece of trash car. No man will ever want you because you are a cold, arrogant, socially unfit nightmare. You are going to die completely alone in this rotting, worthless house, and when you do, nobody is going to care." Her words are designed to inflict maximum emotional damage, targeting the exact insecurities she has mercilessly exploited since we were children. The golden child defending her perfect, fraudulent life by attacking the scapegoat. But her insults land like dead weight. They mean absolutely nothing to me. They are the frantic, desperate shrieks of a woman who realizes her entire existence is entirely dependent on the financial grace of men who are actively failing her. I do not raise my voice to match hers. I do not offer a defensive justification about my life choices. I simply reach into my tailored blazer and retrieve my cell phone. I tap the screen, waking up the display, and hold it up. "You kicked in the front door of a property that belongs exclusively to me," I state, keeping my tone perfectly clinical and detached. "That is breaking and entering. You are currently standing inside my home after being explicitly told your presence is unwanted. That is criminal trespassing. You have exactly 30 seconds to pick up your garbage paperwork and get off my property before I dial 911 and request a police dispatch." Jasmine scoffs, tossing her hair over her shoulder, trying desperately to regain the upper hand. "You would never call the cops on your own family. Try me." I challenge, my thumb hovering directly over the emergency call button. "I will press this button right now. The police can come and take a full report." I am sure Trent's investors would love to read the public police blotter about their lead developer being arrested for kicking down doors in East Atlanta to harass a homeowner. That will do wonders for his next funding round. Trent pales. The threat of public exposure and investor panic is the only language he truly understands. He snatches the quitclaim deed off the oak desk, crumpling the thick paper in his sweaty fist. He grabs Jasmine by the arm, gripping her tightly enough to make her wince. "We are leaving," Trent mutters, his voice tight with suppressed rage. She is completely out of her mind, Jasmine. Let her rot in this dump. Jasmine yanks her arm away from him, but turns toward the door. She shoots me one final venomous glare, her eyes promising a brutal retribution that I know she is too cowardly to actually deliver. You are going to deeply regret this, Kendra. You are entirely dead to this family. I watch in absolute silence as they march out of the study. Their heavy, furious footsteps echo down the main hallway, moving much faster than when they entered. I do not move a muscle until I hear them step off the sagging front porch. A few seconds later, the aggressive roaring sound of Trent's European sports car engine shatters the quiet neighborhood. Tires screech violently against the cracked asphalt. As they peel out of the driveway, the aggressive acceleration completely failing to mask their humiliating retreat. The sound of their engine quickly fades down the street, swallowed by the thick Georgia humidity, leaving me entirely alone in the house once again. The deep, heavy silence of the study returns smelling of old pine and sweet peppermint. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the last lingering traces of my family's toxic grip completely evaporate from my life. They came here to strip me of my dignity and my property, and I had sent them running. I turned my back to the hallway and looked down at the heavy oak desk. I dropped to my knees on the braided rug, sliding my hands into the hollow cavity beneath the floorboards. I grab the heavy metal handle of the fireproof lockbox and pull it back up onto the desk. The red light blinks steadily, waiting for my command. I reach out my finger, hovering over the keypad, ready to finish what Grandpa Elijah started. I press the final digit. 2. The keypad emits a sharp, trilling chime completely different from the angry red warning beep of my previous attempt. The LED indicator light shifts from a solid red to a brilliant blinking green. Deep inside the fireproof casing, I hear the heavy internal deadbolt slide back with a satisfying clunking release. I grip the matte black metal handle, take a long, steadying breath, and pull the heavy lid open. Inside the reinforced casing, the air is stale, smelling faintly of dry-aged paper. I am entirely unsure of what to expect. Given my grandfather's dramatic flair, I anticipate stacks of hidden cash antique jewelry, or perhaps more uncirculated silver certificates. Instead, the box contains 3 distinct, unassuming items: a thick leather-bound ledger book, a standard black USB drive, and a heavy manila folder stamped prominently with the official embossed seal of the Atlanta City Planning Commission. I reach for the manila folder first. The thick parchment paper crackles loudly in the silent study as I unfold the documents inside. It is a commercial zoning application, but it is not filled out by Trent or his heavily indebted limited liability company. It was filed by Grandpa Elijah over 3 years ago, quietly and meticulously pushed through the local bureaucratic channels with the help of high-level municipal attorneys. I scan the dense legal paragraphs, my eyes jumping over the municipal codes until I hit a highlighted section in the center of the 3rd page. The city had recently approved a massive multi-billion-dollar expansion of the Metropolitan Transit line. The new light rail hub, designed to connect the affluent northern suburbs directly to the rapidly growing Eastern Tech Corridor, required a massive centralized anchor property to serve as the main terminal. I look at the parcel numbers listed on the approved city plans. They match the exact coordinates of the lot I am currently sitting on. Grandpa Elijah had successfully rezoned this entire corner from residential to high-density commercial transit use months before his health declined. Attached to the back of the approval notice is an independent certified commercial appraisal from one of the most ruthless commercial real estate valuation firms in the state. The number printed at the bottom of the page makes my heart stop completely. $4.5 million. Trent did not want to flip a residential lot for a quick marginal profit. He knew about the transit expansion. He knew the city was going to offer a massive, lucrative, non-negotiable buyout to whoever held the deed to this specific corner. He marched into my house and tried to hand me $10,000 to steal a $4.5 million golden ticket. The sheer predatory audacity of his scheme makes my blood boil, but the anger is rapidly replaced by a profound sense of awe at my grandfather's brilliant foresight. He knew Trent would try to swindle me, and he handed me the exact paperwork required to destroy Trent's entire development portfolio. I carefully set the appraisal down on the desk and reached back into the lockbox, pulling out the heavy leather-bound ledger. It looks decades old, the corners frayed and the binding loose, but the pages inside are filled with crisp, precise, handwritten entries. My professional instincts take over instantly. I do not see just rows and columns of blue ink. I see a sprawling, interconnected financial narrative. I trace my finger down the first column. The dates go back exactly 10 years. The ledger details the internal classified accounts of Wilson Manufacturing, the massive shipping and logistics empire my father Reginald supposedly built into a regional powerhouse. My father always loudly claimed he took my grandfather's modest regional operation and turned it into a massive corporate success through his own sheer business genius and unmatched intellect. But as I read the numbers, the true deeply buried story emerges from the ink. Column A tracks the legitimate corporate profits. Column B tracks a series of incredibly complex, perfectly camouflaged offshore transfers. I recognize the shell companies listed in the margins. They are registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. They are the exact same corporate entities my father used to purchase his sprawling country club estate, his fleet of luxury cars, and Jasmine's extravagant, untouchable trust fund. Reginald did not build a corporate empire. He spent an entire decade systematically embezzling millions of dollars directly from his own father's company. Every single stolen dollar is accounted for. Every fraudulent wire transfer, every doctored invoice, every fake vendor payment is meticulously documented in Grandpa Elijah's precise, unwavering handwriting. My grandfather had known everything. He had sat quietly at family dinners for 10 years, listening to my father arrogantly boast about his incredible business acumen, knowing full well that Reginald was nothing more than a glorified thief wearing a custom-tailored suit. I pick up the small black USB drive resting at the bottom of the lockbox. It is heavy, likely carrying military-grade encryption, and I know exactly what it contains. The ledger is the physical map of the crimes. The USB drive is the undeniable digital proof. It holds the raw bank statements, the routing numbers, the IP addresses, and the wire transfer receipts. It is the raw, unassailable data that no high-priced corporate defense lawyer will ever be able to spin, bury, or deny. I sit back on the braided rug, the massive weight of the discovery pressing down on my chest. The narrative my family has forced down my throat for 35 years is a complete malicious fabrication. They painted me as the failure, the outcast, the socially awkward disappointment who could never measure up to their staggering financial success. But their entire reality is a fragile house of cards built entirely on stolen money and predatory lies. My father is a corporate criminal. My brother-in-law is a desperate bankrupt fraud. My sister and mother are parasites living a life of luxury funded by theft. I look up at the grid map hanging on the wall. Grandpa Elijah did not just leave me an inheritance. He left me a highly calibrated, devastating weapon, and he left me the exact instructions on how to detonate it. He knew my father would try to cut me out of the company. He knew Trent and Jasmine would try to humiliate and discard me. He anticipated every single one of their selfish, greedy moves, with the precision of a chess grandmaster. He gave them the illusion of wealth to keep them distracted, to let them gorge themselves on their own arrogance. But he gave me the only thing that actually matters in this world. He gave me the truth, and he gave me the unmitigated power to destroy them. I carefully pack the ledger, the zoning documents, and the USB drive into my leather purse, ensuring the brass zipper is completely secured. I stand up, brushing the dust from the knees of my slacks. The scared, intimidated woman who walked into that law office this morning is completely gone. I pull my phone from my pocket and scroll through my contacts, bypassing my family completely. I stop on the name of a senior investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a man I have worked with closely on several massive corporate fraud cases. I do not call him yet. I need to get back to my office first. I need to run the raw data on that USB drive through my forensic software and build an airtight, bulletproof dossier. I walk out of the study and head toward the front door, stepping over the splintered wood Trent left behind. I step out onto the sagging porch, pull the door shut, and walk back to my car. The Georgia heat still beats down on the pavement, but I feel absolutely invincible. I start the engine, put the car in gear, and drive away from the $4.5 million property that is legally undeniably mine. It is time to go to work. It is time to tear Reginald Wilson's fraudulent empire straight to the ground. I spend the entire night locked in my home office, the glow of my dual monitors serving as the only light in the room. I do not sleep. I do not even pause to eat. I run the raw data from Grandpa Elijah's encrypted USB drive through my firm's proprietary forensic tracing software. I watch in absolute awe as 10 years of Reginald Wilson's immaculate financial crimes are mapped out in vibrant, undeniable color across my screens. Every shell company, every hidden offshore account, every fraudulent invoice is perfectly untangled and laid bare. I create 3 separate encrypted digital backups on secure cloud servers and lock the physical ledger back into my grandfather's safe. By the time the sun rises over the Atlanta skyline, I have an ironclad prosecutorial-grade dossier on my own father. At exactly 9 in the morning, my cell phone vibrates against the desk. The caller ID flashes with Reginald's private number. My father has not called me directly in over 3 years. He usually communicates through his executive assistant or sends passive-aggressive text messages through a family group chat. The fact that he is calling me personally on a Sunday morning means Trent ran straight back to the estate yesterday and cried to his father-in-law. I answer on the 4th ring, keeping my voice perfectly flat and neutral. Kendra, Reginald says, bypassing any form of standard greeting. We are having a mandatory Sunday dinner at the estate today. 1 o'clock sharp. Do not be late. We have urgent family matters to discuss. He terminates the call before I can even respond. It is not an invitation. It is a royal summons. He realizes his proxy failed to secure the quitclaim deed, and now the patriarch is stepping in to crush the rebellion himself. I do not wear my usual oversized sweaters or faded denim. I walk into my closet and pull out a tailored charcoal gray suit I reserve exclusively for testifying in federal court. I apply my makeup with surgical precision, slide my feet into sharp black stilettos, and grab my briefcase. I am not walking into a family dinner. I am walking into a tribunal, and I am dressed for a slaughter. The drive to the Buckhead estate takes exactly 40 minutes. I pull my modest sedan up to the towering wrought iron gates of my parents' property. The gates slowly swing open, revealing the sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion. The manicured lawns, the imported Italian marble fountains, the luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway. I look at the opulence surrounding me, and the reality of the ledger settles heavily in my chest. None of this was earned. Every single brick of this estate was paid for, with money stolen directly from Grandpa Elijah. I push open the heavy mahogany front doors and walk straight back to the formal dining room. The room is massive, dominated by a long, polished walnut table seated for 12. But there is no food on the table. There are no plates, no silverware, no glasses. It is an ambush. Reginald sits at the very head of the table wearing a crisp suit even on a Sunday. My mother, Eleanor, sits rigidly to his right, her hands folded perfectly in her lap, wearing a practiced expression of deep disappointment. Trent and Jasmine sit across from her. Trent is aggressively bouncing his knee under the table, his face pale and shining with nervous sweat. Jasmine is glaring at me with unfiltered, venomous hatred, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Take a seat," Kendra Reginald commands, gesturing to the lone empty chair positioned at the opposite end of the massive table. He has deliberately placed me as far away from him as physically possible, forcing me to face them all like an accused criminal standing before a firing squad. I pull the chair out and sit down, placing my leather briefcase carefully on the floor beside my stilettos. I fold my hands on the polished wood and wait. Trent came to me yesterday, deeply distressed. Reginald begins steepling his fingers beneath his chin. He offered you a highly generous, above-market cash buyout for that rotting eyesore your grandfather foolishly left you. Instead of expressing gratitude, I am told you became hostile, belligerent, and threatened to call the authorities on your own family. I simply look at him. I do not defend myself. I let the silence stretch out, forcing him to keep talking to fill the void. Reginald sighs heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose, as if my very existence is a massive, exhausting burden. Kendra, that neighborhood is dangerous. Trent's investors need that lot by Tuesday. We are a prominent black family in this city. We build empires, we don't hoard trash. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the table, shifting into the benevolent, concerned father routine. He has used this exact tone of voice my entire life to manipulate me into submission. I am trying to protect you from yourself, Kendra. You have absolutely no business sense. You never did. You isolate yourself. You run a tiny, insignificant accounting practice, and you have no idea how the real world of commercial real estate operates. That house is a massive liability. The property taxes alone will bankrupt you within a year. Trent is offering you a lifeline. You will take the $10,000, sign the deed over to his limited liability company, and you will apologize to your sister for your unhinged behavior yesterday. My mother nods in immediate silent agreement. You really must listen to your father, Kendra. He knows what is best for your future. You are acting entirely out of spite because you are jealous of Jasmine and Trent's success. It is incredibly unbecoming. Trent puffs his chest out, emboldened by Reginald and Eleanor's steadfast defense. I am willing to overlook the disrespect from yesterday, Kendra. Just sign the paper right now and I will have my bank wire the funds to your account first thing tomorrow morning. We can put all this ugliness behind us. Reginald reaches into his suit jacket and pulls out a crisp, fresh copy of the quitclaim deed. He slides it down the long expanse of the walnut table. It stops directly in front of me, accompanied by an expensive silver fountain pen. Sign it. Reginald orders, his voice dropping, its friendly facade shifting into a cold, absolute demand. You will sign it right now or you are no longer welcome in this house. You will be entirely cut off from this family. I look down at the legal document. I look at the silver pen. Then I look slowly down the table, meeting the eyes of every single person who has spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I look at my mother, who enabled the abuse. I look at Jasmine, who tormented me. I look at Trent, who tried to rob me. And finally, I look at Reginald, the man who funded it all with stolen money. I do not touch the pen. I lean back in my chair and rest my hands casually on the armrests. Before I sign anything, Dad, I say, keeping my voice perfectly calm and conversational. I just have one quick professional question regarding Wilson Manufacturing's fourth quarter ledgers from 2018. Specifically, I am extremely curious about the exact routing numbers attached to those recurring multi-million-dollar transfers sent directly to the Cayman Islands. The silence in the formal dining room thickens into a suffocating vacuum. The air conditioning hums quietly in the background, but the atmosphere around the massive walnut table feels entirely devoid of oxygen. Reginald's coffee cup freezes halfway to his mouth. The polished, impenetrable veneer of the powerful family patriarch shatters for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward Trent, who looks completely bewildered. Eleanor's posture goes entirely rigid, her hands gripping her linen napkin tightly enough to turn her knuckles white. Reginald slowly lowers his cup, the porcelain clinking sharply against the saucer. He clears his throat, desperately attempting to regain control of the room by treating my devastating revelation like a childish outburst. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Kendra, Reginald says, his voice dripping with forced condescension. You are speaking absolute nonsense to distract from the reality of your own failures. You have always possessed an overactive imagination. Before I can respond, Cynthia leans forward. My eldest sister, the lead corporate counsel for Wilson Manufacturing, has always been Reginald's most ruthless attack dog. She sits perfectly poised in her tailored designer suit, viewing my entire existence as a stain on her pristine social record. She reaches into her leather portfolio and extracts a thick, legally binding document, sliding it smoothly across the polished wood. It comes to a stop right next to the silver fountain pen. Sign it, sweetheart, Cynthia says, offering a painfully fake, tight-lipped smile. Dad is offering you $50,000. That is 5 times what Trent generously offered you yesterday. You can finally buy a decent car and stop embarrassing us in front of the country club. She adjusts her diamond watch, her eyes scanning my tailored but unbranded suit with thinly veiled disgust. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is for Mother to explain to her bridge club why her 35-year-old daughter pulls up to family events driving a rusted-out, faded sedan with a taped-on bumper? You are a grown woman living in squalor. Take the 50 grand, pay off whatever miserable credit card debt you are drowning in, and buy a vehicle that does not look like it was salvaged from a junkyard. We are tired of looking at your poverty. I stare at the document sitting on the table, feeling a deep, profound sense of amusement bubbling in my chest. Cynthia is referencing the heavily battered 2008 Honda sedan I drove straight out of college. I kept that car running through pure, stubborn willpower while I ate cheap ramen and built my forensic accounting firm from the ground up precisely because my family refused to help me with a single dime. They watched me struggle for years and did nothing but mock me for it. They are completely blissfully unaware that the battered sedan was retired 6 years ago. They have absolutely no idea that I currently own a custom imported luxury sports car, paid for entirely in cash, sitting securely in the private garage of my penthouse downtown. I deliberately drove an unassuming, nondescript rental car to the estate today, specifically to avoid their predatory gaze. They see exactly what they want to see: a desperate, broken woman they can buy off with pocket change. They are entirely blind to the predator sitting directly across from them. I look up from the contract and meet Cynthia's smug gaze. I do not reach for the pen. Instead, I reach down and unlatch the heavy brass buckles of my briefcase. $50,000, I say slowly, letting the number echo against the high ceilings of the dining room. That is an incredibly generous offer, Cynthia. Especially for a property that the Atlanta City Planning Commission just independently appraised at $4.5 million. The color drains from Cynthia's face instantly. Eleanor drops her fork, the heavy silver clattering loudly against her fine china plate. Trent shoots up out of his chair, his face turning a sickly, panicked shade of gray, the legs of his heavy wooden chair screeching violently across the hardwood floor. That is a complete lie, Trent stammers, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. The city has not released the transit expansion maps to the public yet. Nobody knows the exact coordinates of the new terminal. They released the coordinates to the property owners who filed the commercial zoning applications 3 years ago, I reply, pulling the thick embossed manila folder from my briefcase and tossing it onto the center of the table. The heavy parchment paper slides directly over Cynthia's insulting contract. Grandpa Elijah filed the paperwork himself. He knew the light rail hub was going straight through that corner lot. He knew exactly what the land was worth, and more importantly, he knew exactly what you vultures would try to do the second he passed away. Reginald stands up, slamming both of his fists onto the dining table. The crystal water glasses rattle from the force of the impact. Elijah was a senile old fool, Reginald bellows, his face twisting with absolute fury. He had no legal authority to bypass the family trust. I am the executor of this estate. That property belongs to Wilson Manufacturing. He had every legal authority, Dad, I shoot back, my voice cutting through his manufactured outrage like a razor. The deed was in his name, not yours. He transferred it to me specifically because he realized his own son was using the family manufacturing business to launder stolen money. You will shut your mouth right now. Reginald roars, his composure completely dissolving. You have no proof of anything. You are a paranoid, bitter woman making wild, slanderous accusations because you are jealous of what I have built. I do not make accusations, I say, my voice dropping to a deadly clinical whisper. I pull the black military-grade USB drive from my pocket and hold it up between my fingers. I make forensic financial audits, and this drive contains every single offshore routing number, every fake vendor invoice, and every doctored tax return you filed over the last 10 years. You did not build an empire, Dad. You embezzled millions from your own father to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. I turn my gaze slowly towards Cynthia, whose smug arrogance has been entirely replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. But that is not even the most interesting part of the audit, Cynthia. I drop the USB drive onto the table. It lands with a sharp, heavy click next to the appraisal. The most interesting part, I continue watching Cynthia shrink back into her chair, is whose legal signature is officially authorizing those fraudulent Cayman Island transfers. So tell me, as the lead corporate counsel for Wilson Manufacturing, did Dad forge your signature on those wire transfers, or are you going to federal prison right alongside him? Cynthia stares at the black USB drive resting on the table like it is a highly venomous snake. Her mouth hangs open, the color draining completely from her flawless complexion. She looks frantically at our father, her eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. As the lead corporate counsel, her signature is on every official document filed by Wilson Manufacturing. If she signed off on those offshore transfers willingly, she is a co-conspirator to massive financial fraud. If Reginald forged her signature, her own father has set her up to take the fall for a federal crime. Either way, her pristine corporate career, her immaculate reputation, and her license to practice law are effectively over. She shrinks back into her heavy leather chair, entirely speechless, realizing she is staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Eleanor cannot stand the sudden, drastic shift in power. Desperate to maintain the illusion of absolute control, my mother reaches across the table and aggressively taps her manicured fingernail against the quitclaim deed. Kendra, stop this ridiculous theatrics, Eleanor demands, her voice shrill and trembling with forced authority. Sign the contract. $50,000 is more than generous for that rundown property. Trent is doing you a massive favor, and you are acting like a deeply ungrateful child. We will not tolerate this disrespect at our dinner table. I look directly at my mother. I place my fingertips on the edge of the thick legal document and push it smoothly across the polished walnut table. It slides directly back to her, coming to a stop against her water glass. I do not need $50,000, Mom, I say, my voice carrying the steady, chilling weight of absolute certainty. And Trent does not have any investors. He is over-leveraged by $2 million. I ran his limited liability company's public tax filings this morning. Trent has just taken a large gulp from his crystal wine glass to steady his fraying nerves. At my words, he violently chokes. He coughs forcefully, spraying expensive red wine across his crisp white dress shirt and the pristine table linens. He gasps for air, his face turning a dangerous splotchy shade of purple. He grabs his cloth napkin, frantically wiping his mouth while avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. His slick, confident developer persona evaporates instantly, leaving behind a terrified, drowning man. Reginald erupts. He shoves his heavy wooden chair back so hard it topples over, crashing loudly onto the hardwood floor. His ego is utterly shattered. For years, Reginald has bent over backward to impress Trent. He viewed his white son-in-law as the ultimate social trophy, the golden key that would finally unlock the doors to Atlanta's elite old money country clubs where Reginald desperately craved acceptance. He happily bankrolled Trent and Jasmine's extravagant wedding. He quietly covered the massive down payment on their Buckhead mansion so they could keep up appearances. He paid for Trent's exorbitant initiation fees at the golf club. He paraded Trent around to his business associates, boasting relentlessly about his brilliant self-made real estate developer son-in-law. Reginald essentially bought a white son-in-law to elevate his own social standing, viciously ignoring and isolating his own blood daughter in the process. Now I have just publicly exposed his prized social trophy as a bankrupt, desperate fraud. You are out of your mind, Trent sputters, his voice cracking defensively as he clutches his stained napkin. Those filings are highly complicated. You do not understand commercial debt restructuring or corporate liability. You are just reading numbers you do not comprehend. I understand that you have defaulted on 3 separate bridge loans in the last 4 months, I reply sharply, not breaking eye contact with him. I understand that your primary shell company is currently facing 2 massive liens from unpaid contractors who are actively threatening litigation. You do not want Grandpa Elijah's property to build luxury condominiums. You desperately need to sell that land to the City Transit Authority just to avoid declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy and going to federal prison for defrauding your remaining creditors. Jasmine turns slowly to look at her husband. Her perfect, unbothered facade completely disintegrates, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. Trent Jasmine says, her voice trembling and high-pitched. What is she talking about? Tell me she is lying right now. Tell me we are not broke. Trent refuses to meet her eyes. He stares down at his wine-stained shirt, his jaw clenched tight. His silence is the most damning confession possible. Jasmine lets out a sharp, breathless sound, realizing her entire lavish lifestyle, her designer wardrobe, and her carefully curated socialite image are built on absolute nothingness. Her ruthless friends at the country club will devour her the exact second they find out the truth. The wealth she has used to taunt me her entire life does not even exist. Reginald cannot handle the destruction of his carefully constructed reality. He steps around the fallen chair, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He glares at me with a hatred so visceral it practically burns the air between us. You miserable, vindictive little girl, Reginald snarls, his voice vibrating with unchecked rage. You come into my house, sit at my table, and try to destroy your own family. You are a cancer to this legacy. You have always been a massive disappointment, and now you are actively trying to ruin us. You destroyed this family 10 years ago, when you started stealing from your own father, I counter smoothly, leaning back in my chair. I am just the one turning on the lights so everyone can finally see the rot. You built this entire empire on a foundation of theft, and you thought you could just bully me into silence forever, because I do not care about your country club memberships. Reginald takes a menacing step forward, his chest heaving. He looks down at the USB drive sitting innocently on the table. He actually believes he still has power. He thinks he can simply confiscate the evidence, lock me in this room, and bully me back into submission like he did when I was a vulnerable teenager. You are not leaving this house with that drive, Reginald threatens, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. I will have the security guards lock the front gates. I will personally tear your car apart if I have to. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with, Kendra. I will ruin you before I let you walk out of here with that information. I smile, picking up the city appraisal document and sliding it neatly back into my leather briefcase. You can keep the flash drive, Dad, I say, cheerfully, snapping the brass buckles of my briefcase shut. It is just a copy. The original data, along with a heavily detailed forensic report, was securely emailed to my contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission exactly 10 minutes before I walked through your front door. Cynthia's flawless, icy composure completely shatters. She stares at the black USB drive resting on the table like it is a highly venomous snake. Her mouth opens and closes soundlessly as the sheer gravity of my questions settles over the room. As the lead corporate counsel, her signature is the ultimate legal authorization for Wilson Manufacturing. If she knowingly signed off on those offshore transfers, she is an active co-conspirator to federal fraud. If Reginald forged her signature, her own father has set her up to take the fall for a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Dad! Cynthia whispers, her voice completely stripped of its usual arrogant bite, her eyes wide with a sudden horrifying realization. What did you do? You told me those were standard overseas vendor payments. Reginald ignores her entirely. He cannot tolerate the sudden, drastic loss of control. He refuses to believe that the daughter he has spent 35 years treating like garbage has outmaneuvered him in his own home. His face twists into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. He relies on the only weapon he has ever truly respected, the brute, suffocating force of his wealth. He steps around his fallen chair, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, glaring at me with a hatred so visceral it practically burns the air between us. You think you can intimidate me with fake spreadsheets and empty threats? Reginald snarls, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings of the formal dining room. You are nothing, Kendra. You run a tiny, insignificant practice. You have absolutely no resources, no power, and no influence. He points a heavy finger directly at my chest, leaning aggressively over the walnut table. If you don't sign that quitclaim deed right now, I will have Grandpa's will contested tomorrow morning. He threatens, his eyes flashing with desperate cruelty. I will hire the most vicious estate lawyers in the state. I'll claim he was completely senile, that his mind was gone, and that you maliciously manipulated a sick, dying man to steal family property. You'll spend the rest of your pathetic life drowning in legal fees. I will drag you through the courts for a decade. I will bury you in so much litigation you won't be able to afford your own groceries. You will be entirely bankrupt before the trial even begins. He genuinely thinks he has checkmated me. He looks at me with a triumphant, predatory smirk, fully expecting me to crumble under the weight of his vast resources, just like I did when I was a vulnerable teenager, begging for his approval. He expects me to pick up the silver fountain pen sign over a $4.5 million property for pennies and slink back into the shadows. I look at my mother, who is staring blankly at her china plate, desperately pretending this nightmare isn't happening. I look at Trent, who is still violently pale, clutching his wine-stained shirt in silent terror. I look at Jasmine, whose eyes are wide with the panicked realization that her lavish country club lifestyle is built on absolute nothingness. I do not say a single word. I slowly reach out, pick up the brass handle of my briefcase, and stand up. I smooth the front of my tailored charcoal suit, push my chair in, and turn my back on them. Kendra Reginald barks as I walk toward the dining room doors, his voice laced with sudden, uncontrolled panic. If you walk out that door, you are dead to this family. You will have nothing. I keep walking. The heavy mahogany front doors click shut behind me, with a deeply satisfying resonant thud severing my ties to the Wilson family forever. The Georgia heat hits me the second I step off the manicured front porch, but I feel entirely weightless. I walk purposefully to my unassuming rental car, slide into the driver's seat, and lock the doors. The silence inside the cabin is absolute perfection. My hands are shaking, but not from fear or intimidation. It is pure, unfiltered adrenaline. I place my briefcase on the passenger seat and pull out my laptop. I open it, letting the screen illuminate the dim interior of the car. I plug the encrypted USB drive into the port, pulling up the master ledger of Reginald's offshore Cayman Island accounts. The screen immediately fills with long, complex strings of alphanumeric routing numbers and holding company details. I reach deep into the hidden zippered compartment of my briefcase and pull out the heavy manila envelope I found at the very bottom of Grandpa Elijah's lockbox. Inside is a stack of crisp, uncirculated bills. They are highly unusual, incredibly rare vintage $15 bills, a bizarre and obsolete denomination that Grandpa had meticulously collected and preserved in pristine condition for decades. Reginald had always mocked Elijah's eccentric currency collection, aggressively calling it a pathetic waste of time. But Reginald, in his supreme lazy arrogance, had used the serial numbers of those exact $15 bills to set up his untraceable offshore shell companies. He likely copied the numbers from the collection years ago, assuming the old man would never notice the intrusion or comprehend their digital significance. I fan the $15 bills out across the center console of the car, the vintage paper crisp beneath my fingertips. I look closely at the black ink printed on the top right corner of the first bill. The serial number reads C849204719B. I slowly look up at my laptop screen. The primary routing number for Reginald's largest offshore shell company, the account holding over $6 million in stolen corporate funds, is exactly C849204719B. My breath catches in my throat. I grab the second $15 bill. The serial number is F293847104A. I check the screen. The secondary offshore account registered under a fake holding corporation in Delaware is exactly F293847104A. I check the third bill, the fourth, the fifth. Every single serial number printed on the rare $15 bills corresponds perfectly digit for digit with Reginald's hidden offshore accounts. Grandpa Elijah was not just keeping a handwritten record of the stolen money. He was tracking the exact digitized destinations. He had silently cataloged the $15 bills, cross-referenced them with the fraudulent corporate wire transfers, and handed the entire cipher directly to me. I lean back against the headrest, a brilliant, uncontrollable smile spreading across my face. Reginald threatened to drown me in legal fees, boasting about his immense wealth and his untouchable corporate lawyers. But the wealth he is threatening me with is sitting directly in front of me. with the serial numbers acting as the foundational account identification codes and the supplementary data on the flash drive containing the master routing access. I don't just have undeniable proof of the crime, I have the absolute authority to freeze the assets. Grandpa Elijah didn't just give me the evidence to send my father to federal prison. He gave me the exact keys to seize every single dollar Reginald ever stole. I start the engine of the rental car, put it in drive, and pull out of the sprawling, fraudulent estate for the very last time. It is time to make a phone call to a very specific, ruthless asset recovery lawyer. Reginald Wilson is about to learn exactly what it feels like to truly lose everything. I grip the steering wheel of my rental car, the leather warm against my palms, and dial the direct cell phone number of Marcus Vance. Marcus is a former federal prosecutor who transitioned into private asset recovery. He specializes in dismantling high-net-worth corporate criminals and repatriating stolen funds. He answers on the second ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the early Sunday hour. I do not exchange pleasantries. I tell him I have the complete digital ledger, the offshore routing numbers, and the physical cipher linking Reginald Wilson to a 10-year embezzlement scheme. Marcus breathes in sharply, recognizing the magnitude of the kill. I hire him on the spot, authorizing a blank check retainer. The weekend passes in a blur of encrypted file transfers and tactical legal planning. By Monday morning, I am sitting at my desk in my downtown accounting firm. My office is sleek, minimalist, and impenetrable. The frosted glass door swings open at exactly 9 in the morning, admitting a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, clutching a thick manila envelope. He asks for Kendra Wilson. I stand up, extending my hand. He drops the envelope onto my desk, mutters a legally mandated confirmation of service, and practically runs out the door. I slice the envelope open with a steel letter opener. Inside is a 60-page cease and desist order filed at the county courthouse the exact second the clerk's office opened. Cynthia's legal letterhead is stamped aggressively across the top margin. The document is a masterpiece of fabricated legal aggression. Reginald is officially contesting Grandpa Elijah's quitclaim deed. He has thrown the entire $4.5 million Transit Authority property into a vicious probate dispute. The injunction claims my grandfather was of diminished mental capacity, that he suffered from severe undocumented dementia, and that I exerted malicious undue influence over a vulnerable senior citizen to steal the family's primary commercial asset. The injunction legally bars me from communicating with the City Transit Authority selling the land or making any alterations to the property until a judge can rule on the validity of the deed. Reginald is attempting to freeze the chessboard. He knows the Transit Authority needs to break ground in less than 6 months. He believes that by tying the land up in a brutal, protracted legal battle, he can force me to settle for Trent's pathetic $50,000 offer just to make the lawsuit disappear. I toss the injunction onto my desk. It is an annoyance, but entirely expected. I grab my purse and head down to the lobby cafe to grab an espresso before my 10 o'clock client meeting. I order my drink, swipe my personal bank card, and wait for the familiar chime of the card reader. Instead, the machine emits a harsh, flat rejection tone. The barista frowns, punches a few buttons on the screen, and asks me to try again. I swipe the card a second time. Declined. I step out of the line, a cold, sharp realization settling over my chest. I pull out my phone and open my mobile banking application. A red banner flashes across the top of my screen. My checking account, my savings account, and my personal credit line are completely locked. The available balances all read 0. I immediately dial the customer service line for the regional bank. I do not get routed to a standard representative. My call is instantly flagged and redirected to the office of the regional branch manager. He answers with a tight, incredibly uncomfortable tone, stumbling over his words as he tries to explain the situation. He tells me that my accounts have been placed under an administrative hold due to a pending internal review regarding suspicious activity. He refuses to give me any specific details. He refuses to tell me when the hold will be lifted. I hang up the phone, standing perfectly still in the middle of the bustling coffee shop. I know exactly what happened. Reginald Wilson sits on the executive advisory board of that specific regional bank. It is the same bank he uses to handle all of Wilson Manufacturing's legitimate domestic payroll. He simply made a phone call, leveraged his massive corporate accounts, and ordered the manager to freeze every single dollar associated with my social security number. It is a classic, brutal financial abuse tactic. It is the exact same maneuver he pulled during my sophomore year of college. When I refused to change my major from accounting to corporate marketing, Reginald drove to the bank and completely liquidated my checking account. He canceled my meal plan and refused to pay my dormitory fees. He starved me out completely, cutting off my access to food and shelter, forcing me to rely on the charity of my roommates just to survive the semester. He expects the exact same result today. He thinks I am a vulnerable woman living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of missing my rent. He thinks he has completely stripped away my ability to fight back, leaving me entirely dependent on his mercy. My phone buzzes in my hand. A new voicemail notification appears on the screen. It is from Reginald. I press play, lifting the speaker to my ear. Kendra, Reginald says, his voice dripping with triumphant, sickening satisfaction. I warned you not to play games with me. The property is in probate. Your accounts are frozen pending a fraud investigation. You have absolutely no money, no legal representation, and nowhere to run. I will give you exactly 24 hours to drive back to the estate, apologize to your sister, and sign the deed over to Trent. If you do not, you will spend the rest of your miserable life entirely bankrupt. Call me when you are ready to act like an adult. The voicemail clicks off. I stand in the lobby listening to the quiet hum of the espresso machines. I do not feel fear. I do not feel panic. I feel a deep, overwhelming sense of absolute victory. Reginald is fighting a war that ended 6 years ago. He is targeting a ghost. I walk calmly back to the elevators, ride up to my office floor, and lock my suite door behind me. I sit down at my desk and wake up my primary computer terminal. I do not use the regional bank for anything other than trivial day-to-day expenses like coffee and groceries. I purposely kept that account open and active simply to give Reginald the illusion that he could still monitor my financial footprint. I fed him a decoy. I open an encrypted secure web portal routed through a virtual private network. I type in a randomized 16-character password and authenticate the login with a biometric scan. The screen loads, displaying the dashboard of a massive, irrevocable corporate trust registered anonymously in the state of Wyoming. The trust is legally impenetrable. It is shielded by layers of corporate privacy laws that make it entirely impossible for anyone, including Reginald and his team of ruthless lawyers, to attach my name to the assets. Inside this trust is the absolute entirety of my true wealth. My firm's 7-figure operational capital, my personal investment portfolios, and the deed to my luxury penthouse are all securely locked behind a wall of titanium legal protection. The trust holds over $3 million in highly liquid assets. I am not a starving college student. I am a heavily armed financial predator, and Reginald has absolutely no idea that I am completely untouchable. He thinks I am starved for cash. He thinks I will come crawling back to the estate begging for his forgiveness and a $50,000 handout. He expects me to surrender. Instead, I am pivoting from defense to a full, devastating offense. I pick up my phone and dial Marcus Vance. He answers immediately, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. Marcus, I say, pulling the 60-page cease and desist order across my desk. My father just filed the probate injunction. He also leveraged his board position to illegally freeze my personal checking accounts at the regional branch. Marcus lets out a low, predatory chuckle. Financial coercion and banking fraud on top of a decade of corporate embezzlement. Your father is handing us the rope to hang him with Kendra. Do you want me to file the federal countersuit now? File it. I command, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. But we are going to hit him on multiple fronts. I want you to initiate the formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. Send them the entire decrypted ledger and the serial number cipher. I want federal agents walking into the Wilson Manufacturing lobby by Wednesday morning. Understood. Marcus says, his tone shifting into pure professional execution. What about your brother-in-law? What do you want to do about Trent? I open a second tab on my monitor, pulling up the public registry of commercial debt. Trent's limited liability company is bleeding cash. His bridge loans are in default, and his creditors are circling like sharks. Trent is overleveraged by $2 million, I explained, scanning the list of his desperate financial obligations. I want you to use the Wyoming Trust to quietly purchase his primary debt portfolios from his creditors. Buy the notes at a premium if you have to. I want to own every single dollar that man owes. The second the ink dries on the debt transfer, I want you to call his loans in. Demand immediate payment in full. When he cannot pay, I want you to file the paperwork to seize his assets, starting with the Buckhead mansion my father bought for him. It is a merciless, devastating tactical strike. I am not just going to stop Trent from stealing my property. I am going to legally repossess the very house he sleeps in. I am going to strip away the unearned luxury my father handed him and leave him with absolutely nothing. Consider it done. Marcus says, the sound of his keyboard moving faster now. We will have him in bankruptcy court before the end of the month. I end the call and set the phone down on the glass surface of my desk. I look out the window of my office, watching the busy Atlanta traffic moving silently on the streets below. Reginald thought he could starve me into submission. He thought he could use his power to crush me into the dirt. But he forgot that I spent the last 10 years learning exactly how money moves, how power operates, and how to destroy a man using his own arrogance against him. I am going to tear his empire down brick by brick, and I'm going to make sure he watches me do it. I hang up the phone with Marcus Vance, the silence of my office pressing in around me. The adrenaline is still humming in my veins, but I force my breathing to slow and steady itself. It is time to execute the first localized strike. I pull up the decrypted files from the USB drive on my primary monitor. I bypass the massive offshore holding accounts for a moment and dig straight into the daily operational ledgers of Wilson Manufacturing. I am looking for a very specific, highly damaging transaction. I find it buried deep in the third quarter records from 2 years ago, a joint venture supply chain contract between my father's company and Hayes International, a massive global logistics firm. Reginald had always paraded the CEO, Richard Hayes, around our sprawling estate during his lavish summer barbecues. I vividly remember carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres past them on the patio, while Reginald loudly mocked my decision to open a boutique forensic accounting firm instead of joining his corporate empire. Richard had laughed, slapping my father on the back, completely oblivious to the fact that his supposed brother was actively robbing him blind. The document I extract from the encrypted drive is a masterfully doctored bill of lading paired with a diverted wire transfer receipt. Reginald had authorized a 40% markup on shipping containers, skimming the excess straight off the top and routing it through a phantom vendor registered in Delaware. That phantom vendor shared the exact alphanumeric sequence of one of Grandpa Elijah's vintage $15 bills. I isolate the single damning page. I do not send the entire 200-page dossier. That would be too messy, too easy for a high-priced crisis management firm to spin as a massive corporate hack or a coordinated digital smear campaign. A single page is a surgical scalpel. It is a loose thread that, once pulled by a paranoid corporate partner, will unravel the entire sweater. I boot up a secure encrypted email server routed through 3 separate offshore virtual private networks. I address the email directly to Richard Hayes Carbon, copying the Chief Compliance Officer and the Head of Internal Auditing at Hayes International. I attach the PDF. The subject line is simple and devoid of emotion. Wilson Manufacturing Joint Venture Discrepancy. I hit send. The beauty of a targeted corporate leak is the terrifyingly fast speed at which the infection spreads. Within 45 minutes, my proprietary tracking software intercepts a massive spike in encrypted data traffic originating from the Hayes International servers, all directed straight toward Wilson Manufacturing's legal department. The dominoes are officially wobbling. Reginald's pristine corporate facade is cracking in real time. While I am watching the digital fallout map across my screen, Marcus calls back. He is ruthlessly efficient. He confirms that my anonymous Wyoming trust successfully purchased Trent's toxic commercial debt portfolios at a steep discount. The original creditors were practically begging to offload the bad paper. The second the transfer cleared, Marcus filed the immediate legal demand for payment in full. $2 million due immediately. The silence of my office is suddenly shattered by the aggressive vibration of my cell phone. The caller ID flashes with Jasmine's name. I accept the call, hitting the speakerphone button and setting the device on my glass desk. She is absolutely hysterical. The shrill, piercing sound of her screaming fills my quiet workspace. She demands to know what I have done. Trent's commercial zoning permit for the luxury condominiums was flatly rejected by the city council this morning. The city planners required proof of ownership for the anchor lot, the exact property Grandpa Elijah left me. Trent had confidently assured his remaining highly leveraged investors that the deed was secured. When the permit was denied and the lie was exposed, the investors instantly triggered their exit clauses. They pulled their funding completely. But that is not even the worst of it, Jasmine shrieks, her voice breaking into a ragged, desperate sob. Some anonymous holding company just called in all of Trent's bridge loans, $2 million. They froze his operating accounts. The bank is threatening to seize the Buckhead house. You ruined us. You ruined my life because you are a jealous, pathetic loser. I listened to her hyperventilate, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. I did not force Trent to falsify his investor reports, Jasmine, I reply smoothly, leaning back in my chair. I did not force him to take out predatory commercial loans he could never repay. He built a fraudulent life to impress Dad, and you happily spent money that did not exist. I just refused to let you steal my inheritance to cover your husband's sheer incompetence. You ruined your own life. Have fun explaining the foreclosure to your friends at the country club. I terminate the call before she can scream another word. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rings again. This time, it is my mother. I answer, bracing myself for the inevitable emotional manipulation. Eleanor is crying, but it is not the raw, terrified weeping of a woman losing her home like Jasmine. It is the calculated, dramatic weeping of a socialite losing her status. Kendra, you are destroying the family legacy. Eleanor gasps, her voice dripping with practiced distress. Richard Hayes just suspended all contracts with your father's company pending a massive internal audit. The board of directors is panicking. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high. You are tearing us apart over a misunderstanding. She does not care about the embezzlement. She does not care that Reginald stole millions from his own father. She only cares that the resulting scandal will tarnish her pristine reputation in Atlanta high society. She begs me to come to Reginald's highly publicized Black Excellence Business Gala this weekend. It is a massive black tie networking event he hosts annually at a luxury hotel downtown to stroke his own ego. We need to show a united front. Eleanor pleads, her desperation bleeding through the phone. You need to come and play the dutiful daughter. Show the board of directors that the family is intact. Save your father's reputation, Kendra. I will make sure he lifts the freeze on your bank accounts. Just come and fix this. I stare at the dual monitors displaying the sprawling web of Reginald's financial crimes. A public high society gala with all of his investors, board members, and corporate partners in attendance. It is the absolute perfect stage. I tell my mother I will be there. Moments later, a text message from Reginald appears on my screen. It is completely devoid of the panic my mother just displayed. It is cold, arrogant, and commanding. Bring the deed. This is your last chance to be part of this family. I smile, sliding my phone into my pocket. He actually thinks I am coming to surrender. I walk over to my secure filing cabinet and retrieve my leather briefcase. I pack the original quitclaim deed. I carefully pack the pristine vintage 1953 silver certificates. Finally, I slide in the massive 200-page printed dossier detailing every single offshore transaction, meticulously cross-referenced with the currency serial numbers. I am going to the gala, and I am going to burn Reginald Wilson's fraudulent empire straight to the ground while the entire city watches. The Atlanta skyline glitters through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the St. Regis Ballroom, casting a shimmering backdrop over the absolute pinnacle of Reginald Wilson's ego. The annual Black Excellence Business Gala is less of a networking event and more of a meticulously funded coronation. Hundreds of the city's most elite power players, state politicians, corporate titans, and old money socialites drift across the imported marble floors. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulate with trays of champagne and beluga caviar. A live jazz band plays smoothly from a raised mahogany stage. It is a room built entirely on appearances, networking, and the aggressive display of wealth. For the past 10 years, Reginald has used this exact night to solidify his narrative as a benevolent patriarch and a brilliant self-made titan of industry. He has carefully curated the story of his family, showcasing Cynthia as his legal prodigy and parading Jasmine around as the flawless socialite married to a high-powered real estate developer. And for 10 years, I have been the family ghost. When colleagues asked about his third daughter, Reginald would sigh with practiced performative sadness, shaking his head and muttering about my tragic lack of ambition, my refusal to apply myself, and my unfortunate status as a destitute college dropout who simply could not handle the pressure of the corporate world. Tonight, I shatter that illusion the exact second I step through the grand double doors. I do not arrive in the sensible, off-the-rack, business casual attire they always expected me to wear. I arrive in a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown that fits me with lethal perfection. The fabric drapes elegantly across my frame, featuring a sharp, asymmetrical neckline and a striking slit that reveals a pair of diamond-strapped stiletto heels. My hair is styled in flawless, voluminous waves, and a heavy geometric diamond collar rests against my collarbone. I look exactly like a woman who manages millions of dollars in highly classified corporate assets. I look like a predator stepping onto the feeding ground. The reaction is immediate and visceral. The heavy mahogany doors shut behind me, and a sudden, highly noticeable ripple of silence cuts through the nearest crowd of guests. Heads turn. Conversations abruptly halt. People who have known Reginald for decades stare at me in absolute shock, their eyes darting between my stunning, commanding presence and the false narrative they have been fed for years. I do not shrink under their gaze. I square my shoulders, lift my chin, and glide smoothly onto the ballroom floor, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. I spot my family immediately. They are holding court near the center of the room, standing beside the mayor and two prominent state senators. Jasmine sees me first. The blood instantly drains from her face, leaving her looking splotchy and entirely horrified. She is wearing a heavily beaded designer gown, but the stress of the last 48 hours has ravaged her. Her eyes are puffy, her posture is rigid, and her fake socialite smile completely disintegrates. She glares at me with a hatred so pure it practically vibrates across the room, burning with the absolute envy of a woman who just realized her entire identity is facing imminent foreclosure. I do not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I turn my gaze and walk purposefully toward the massive glowing ice bar at the edge of the room. I need a glass of sparkling water before I dismantle the rest of this facade. Before I can even reach the bartender, a heavy, sweaty hand clamps down hard on my shoulder. I turn sharply, shrugging off the aggressive grip. Trent stands blocking my path. He looks entirely unhinged. His expensive tuxedo jacket is unbuttoned. His bow tie is crooked and a sheen of terrified sweat coats his forehead. He is holding a heavy crystal tumbler of straight scotch, and his hand is shaking so violently the amber liquid sloshes over the rim and drips onto the marble floor. "You think you are so clever," Trent hisses, leaning in close, his breath reeking of expensive liquor and blind panic. "You think you can just bankrupt me and walk away. I know it was you. My lawyers tracked the holding company that bought my debt. It routes back to an anonymous Wyoming trust, and I know you are the one pulling the strings." I look at him with a mixture of profound boredom and complete disgust. "I highly suggest you lower your voice, Trent," I reply smoothly, brushing an invisible speck of dust off the silk of my gown. "You are making a pathetic scene and your investors are watching you sweat." "I will ruin you," he snarls completely, ignoring my warning, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You stole my zoning permit. You called in $2 million of commercial loans in a single afternoon. The bank is literally seizing my house tomorrow morning. You're going to call off your attack dogs, release the debt, and give me that deed right now, or I swear to God I will drag you down with me." I do not step back. I step directly forward, closing the distance between us, forcing him to look down into my eyes. You dragged yourself down, Trent, I say, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. You built a fraudulent shell company on predatory bridge loans because you lack the intelligence to run a legitimate business. You lied to your investors, you failed to secure your anchor properties, and you thought you could simply steal my inheritance to cover up your massive, glaring incompetence. You are a drowning man, and I am simply the one who refused to throw you a life raft. Enjoy the bankruptcy court. I hear the federal auditors are entirely merciless. Trent opens his mouth to shout, his face twisting into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. But before he can utter a single sound, Reginald is suddenly there. My father moves with terrifying silent speed. He grabs my upper arm with a grip so vicious and tight, his fingers dig painfully into my skin. His face is arranged into a wide, beaming, perfectly fake smile for the surrounding guests. But his eyes are entirely dead. "Excuse us, Trent," Reginald says, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury. "My daughter and I need to have a private family discussion." He does not wait for a response. He forcefully steers me away from the bar, marching me aggressively past the ice sculptures, past the jazz band, and directly toward the back of the ballroom. He nods and smiles at his wealthy colleagues as we pass, masking his physical coercion as a protective fatherly escort. I do not struggle. I allow him to guide me down a quiet, heavily carpeted corridor, away from the prying eyes of his corporate kingdom. He shoves open a set of heavy, soundproof mahogany doors and pulls me into a private VIP antechamber. He slams the door shut behind us, engaging the heavy brass deadbolt with a sharp, echoing click. The silence inside the room is suffocating. The plush leather sofas and dim amber lighting stand in stark contrast to the glittering chaos of the ballroom. Cynthia is already inside, pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug like a caged animal. She looks physically ill. She is clutching a tumbler of vodka, her perfectly manicured fingernails tapping frantically against the glass. The anonymous leak of the Hayes International supply chain documents has clearly reached her desk, and the sheer terror of a federal corporate audit is eating her alive. Jasmine stands rigidly in the corner, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered venom. Reginald releases my arm and steps back, his chest heaving as the public mask completely drops. "What the hell are you wearing?" Reginald demands, gesturing aggressively at my custom silk gown. "You think you can waltz into my event playing dress-up with whatever credit cards you have left? I froze your bank accounts, Kendra. I know exactly how much cash you don't have. You are entirely broke, and you are standing here trying to humiliate me in front of the mayor." I calmly smooth the sleeve of my dress, my pulse steady, my breathing perfectly even. I do not say a word. Reginald reaches inside his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulls out a heavy gold-plated Mont Blanc pen. He slams it down onto the glass coffee table with a violent, ringing crack. "I am done playing your pathetic, vindictive games!" Reginald snarls, stepping directly into my space, using his height to loom over me. "You are going to take that quitclaim deed out of whatever cheap bag you brought it in, and you are going to sign it over to Trent right now." I look at the pen resting on the glass, then slowly lift my eyes to meet his, and if I decline, I ask, my voice echoing smoothly in the soundproof room. Reginald's face twists into a cruel, triumphant sneer. He genuinely believes he holds all the cards. He thinks his financial abuse has left me completely destitute and entirely at his mercy. "If you decline, I will have my private security team drag you out of this room by your hair," Reginald threatens, his voice dropping to a dangerous, guttural whisper. "They will march you through the main lobby in front of every single politician, investor, and reporter in this city. I will publicly announce that you are a deeply disturbed, financially ruined woman who tried to extort her own family. You will leave this hotel with absolutely nothing, and you will never recover. Now pick up the pen and sign the damn paper. Don't embarrass me tonight." Cynthia stops pacing. Jasmine holds her breath. They are all waiting for me to break. They are waiting for the obedient, frightened daughter to finally submit to the patriarch's absolute rule. I smile. It is not a warm smile. It is the cold, calculated smile of an executioner. I walk slowly to the leather sofa, unfasten the brass buckles of my briefcase, and open it. I do not pull out the quitclaim deed. I do not reach for the pen. Instead, I pull out a massive 200-page printed dossier bound in heavy black leather. I drop it onto the glass coffee table right next to his gold pen. The impact sounds like a gunshot in the quiet room. Then I reach into the hidden compartment of my briefcase. I pull out the thick stack of crisp vintage 1953 silver certificates, the rare $15 bills. I fan them out slowly and deliberately across the dark glass, making absolutely sure the serial numbers are perfectly visible under the amber lighting. I look up at Reginald. The blood has completely drained from his face. His arrogant sneer vanishes instantly, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated terror. He stares at the vintage currency, as if I have just placed a live explosive on the table. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I say, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Tonight is going to be incredibly embarrassing." I look down at the heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen resting on the dark glass of the coffee table. I do not touch it. I do not even acknowledge the quitclaim deed Reginald so desperately needs me to sign. Instead, I reach out and pick up the 2 vintage silver certificates I just fanned across the surface. I separate them from the rest of Grandpa Elijah's collection, holding up the $10 bill and the $5 bill by their crisp, uncirculated edges. The amber lighting of the VIP room catches the obsolete ink illuminating the unique alphanumeric strings printed in the corners. "You asked what the ROI on a broke old man was. Dad? It's $15. I drop the 2 bills back onto the glass right on top of his precious gold pen. I pick up the massive 200-page black leather-bound dossier and shove it forcefully across the table until it hits his chest. "Those serial numbers match the Cayman Island accounts you've been funneling Grandpa's money into for 10 years. I state, my voice slicing through the suffocating silence of the soundproof room with absolute lethal precision. Every single illicit wire transfer, every doctored supply chain invoice, every fraudulent shell company you registered in Delaware, it is all documented right there. The total is $12.4 million. The implosion is spectacular and immediate. The aggressive, terrifying patriarch, who has ruled this family through fear and financial manipulation, completely disintegrates before my eyes. Reginald's face turns a sickly ashen gray. The color drains so rapidly from his skin that he looks like a corpse. He staggers backward, the backs of his knees hitting the plush leather sofa, and he collapses heavily onto the cushions. He stares at the thick dossier resting in his lap, his hands trembling violently, absolutely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his exposure. Cynthia lets out a sharp, horrifying gasp. She presses both of her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and panicked as she stares at our father. As the lead corporate counsel for Wilson Manufacturing, she has been blindly stamping her approval on Reginald's financial directives for a decade. She suddenly realizes that her lavish lifestyle, her immaculate reputation, and her prestigious legal career have been entirely funded by stealing from her own grandfather. Worse, her signature is on the fraudulent documents. She is not just a beneficiary of dirty money. She is a documented accessory to a massive federal crime. She shrinks back against the wall, hyperventilating as she visualizes the catastrophic end of her license to practice law and the very real threat of federal prison. Jasmine looks like the floor has just dropped out from beneath her. Her perfect, smug socialite facade melts into an expression of profound, unadulterated terror. She realizes that her precious trust fund, her designer wardrobe, and her elite country club memberships are built entirely on fraud. The generational wealth she has used to taunt, isolate, and demean me, her entire life is a complete mirage. Without Reginald's stolen millions to prop up Trent's failing real estate ventures, she is completely destitute. Her ruthless friends in high society will shun her the exact second the scandal breaks, leaving her with absolutely nothing. Reginald tries to speak. His jaw works soundlessly for a moment before he manages to force out a pathetic, gravelly whisper. The deed, Reginald chokes out, pointing a shaking finger at my open briefcase. You have to sign the deed over to Trent. It is the only way we can generate enough immediate liquidity to cover the missing corporate funds before the board finds out. We can fix this, Kendra. We can keep it in the family. I look at the broken man on the sofa with absolute icy detachment. I already sold the house, Dad, I say, enjoying the utter devastation washing over his face, to the city for their new community transit hub, $4.5 million. Reginald's eyes bulge in sheer disbelief. He had spent months trying to bully me into giving the estate to his golden son-in-law for pennies, assuming I was too naive to understand its true commercial value. He never anticipated that I would bypass Trent completely, take Grandpa Elijah's original blueprints directly to the municipal planners, and negotiate a multi-million-dollar municipal buyout entirely on my own. And I gave the IRS and the SEC a tip about the serial numbers. I continue stepping back from the glass table and snapping the brass buckles of my briefcase shut. They have been quietly verifying the offshore transfers all week. They are waiting for you at your office on Monday. The reality of his impending destruction finally breaks him. The imposing, untouchable CEO vanishes. Reginald slides off the leather sofa, his expensive tuxedo pants hitting the floor, and he drops heavily onto his knees. He reaches out with desperate, shaking hands, grasping at the silk fabric of my midnight blue gown. Tears spill over his eyelashes, streaming down his ashen face in a pathetic display of utter defeat. Kendra, please. Reginald begs, his voice breaking into a ragged, desperate sob. Please, I am your father. You cannot do this to me. They will take the company. They will freeze everything. I will die in a federal penitentiary. You have the money from the house. You have the power to stop the investigation. Please, I am begging you. Just pull the tip back. I will give you anything you want. I will make you a full partner. Just please do not destroy my legacy. He is crying, groveling on the floor of a VIP room while his elite colleagues drink champagne just a few yards away. He is offering me the exact approval and validation I spent my entire childhood starving for. 10 years ago, seeing my father on his knees weeping for my mercy might have made me hesitate. It might have made me crave his sudden desperate affection. Today it means absolutely nothing. I look down at him, my expression cold and completely devoid of sympathy. I gently but firmly pull the fabric of my dress out of his trembling grip. I'm taking your advice, Dad, I say, my voice echoing smoothly in the quiet room. I'm not wasting my time on a broke old man. I turn my back on his weeping form, on Cynthia's panicked hyperventilating, and on Jasmine's shattered reality. I walk to the heavy mahogany door, unlock the deadbolt, and step out into the bright, glittering corridor. I do not look back as the door swings shut, sealing them inside the ruins of their own fraudulent empire. As I walk down the long, carpeted hallway toward the exit, the muffled sound of the jazz band fades away, replaced by the smooth, booming voice of the gala's master of ceremonies echoing through the main ballroom speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the main stage to honor a man of unparalleled integrity, a true pillar of our business community. Let us give a warm round of applause as Reginald Wilson comes forward to accept this year's Excellence in Business Award. The thunderous applause of hundreds of elite guests fills the air, cheering for a titan of industry who no longer exists. I smile, pushing open the heavy glass doors of the luxury hotel, and step out into the cool, dark night, stepping into my future, and leaving the ghost of the family scapegoat behind forever. 6 months blur by with the speed of a falling guillotine. The federal raid on Wilson Manufacturing happens exactly 3 days after the gala. I watch the live news coverage from the comfort of my office, sipping black coffee as men in dark windbreakers carry boxes of hard drives, filing cabinets, and encrypted servers out of the glass corporate building. The IRS and the SEC do not simply audit Reginald, they completely dismantle him. They freeze his offshore accounts, seize his domestic properties, and padlock the doors to his corporate headquarters. The man who spent his entire life building an empire on the illusion of invincibility is currently under house arrest, wearing a heavy GPS ankle monitor and awaiting federal indictment for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The mighty patriarch has been reduced to a panicked, aging criminal trapped in an empty house watching his legacy evaporate on the evening news. Jasmine's spectacular descent into irrelevance is almost poetic to witness. The moment the bank froze Trent's operating accounts and seized the Buckhead estate, her husband packed a single duffel bag and vanished into the night. He boarded a one-way flight to a non-extradition country, leaving Jasmine holding millions of dollars in highly leveraged commercial debt and a mountain of unpaid contractor invoices. Her pristine influencer lifestyle implodes overnight. The country club revokes her membership for unpaid dues. Her high society friends, the same women who happily drank her champagne and validated her arrogance, block her number the second the federal indictments hit the papers. I drove past her new residence last week. It is a cramped 400-square-foot studio apartment situated above a noisy 24-hour laundromat in a heavily gentrified but decidedly unglamorous part of the city. My private investigator sent me a photo of her trying to film a luxury skincare tutorial on her phone, desperately attempting to angle the camera to crop out the stained, peeling wallpaper and the exposed pipes behind her. The illusion is entirely dead, and she is left with nothing but the crushing reality of her own shallow, empty existence. Cynthia's downfall is the most clinical and perhaps the most devastating. As the lead corporate counsel who deliberately signed off on Reginald's Cayman Island transfers, the Bar Association immediately suspends her license pending a massive, highly publicized ethics investigation. She cannot practice law, her prestigious firm fires her within 24 hours, and she certainly cannot afford the ballooning mortgage on her downtown penthouse. To cover Reginald's staggering mounting legal defense fees, she is forced to liquidate everything she owns. The woman who once mocked my off-the-rack blazers and flaunted her corporate superiority is now a desperate regular at high-end consignment shops across Atlanta. She spends her afternoons trading her limited edition Birkin bags, her Cartier watches, and her diamond tennis bracelets for fractions of their original value just to keep Reginald's cutthroat lawyers from dropping his case. She is permanently chained to a sinking ship of her own making, frantically bailing water, while the hull completely shatters around her. I step out onto the sprawling wraparound balcony of my newly expanded firm. The crisp morning air of Atlanta hits my face, carrying the faint scent of rain and city asphalt. Over the past 6 months, my boutique forensic accounting agency has tripled in size and scope. The massive influx of capital from the sale of Grandpa Elijah's anchor lot allowed me to buy out the entire top floor of this premium commercial high-rise. I hired 12 new junior analysts, all brilliant, hungry, and entirely dedicated to uncovering corporate fraud. My firm is now the premier destination for tracking hidden assets, specializing in exposing the exact kind of financial abuse Reginald perpetrated for decades. We take the cases that other firms find too tangled, too dangerous, or too deeply buried. I am no longer fighting for scraps at the bottom of the barrel or begging for a seat at the table. I own the table. I walk back inside this heavy glass door, sealing out the noise of the waking city below. My corner office is a testament to quiet, absolute authority. There are no flashy ice sculptures, no performative networking events, and no desperate attempts to impress local politicians. The walls are lined with degrees, certifications, and successful case files. There is only the steady hum of productivity, the quiet, profound satisfaction of doing impeccable work, and the absolute security of true financial independence. I walk over to my massive custom-built oak desk and look at the center display. It is a simple, elegant frame made of dark cherry wood standing exactly where anyone who enters my office must look at it. Inside the glass, perfectly preserved and illuminated by a small warm brass lamp, are the pristine vintage 1953 silver certificates, the $10 bill and the $5 bill. They are smoothed out, their serial numbers, fully visible, representing the key that unlocked a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Next to the frame sits a small black and white photograph of Grandpa Elijah, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a warm, genuine smile. I trace the edge of the wooden frame with my fingertips, feeling a profound sense of connection to the man who saw my worth when no one else bothered to look. He knew exactly what he was doing when he left me that specific plot of land, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he handed me those 2 bills and whispered about the return on investment. He knew I was the only one in the Wilson family who possessed the intelligence to see the true value in what everyone else carelessly discarded. He gave me the tools to expose the toxic rot infecting our bloodline, and I used them with flawless surgical precision. The vicious narrative my parents spun about me being a frumpy, untalented dropout is completely dead-buried under the undeniable towering weight of my professional and personal success. I look out over the city skyline, breathing in the quiet peace of a life I built entirely on my own terms. I didn't destroy my family. I just handed them the bill for everything they broke, and I made sure they paid in full. The most profound lesson from this story is that your worth is never determined by those who actively try to diminish you. For years, the protagonist endured emotional abuse and financial manipulation from a toxic family that prioritized superficial appearances and greed over genuine love. However, she proved that true power comes from building your own independence. By quietly cultivating her skills, securing her financial future, and refusing to play their twisted games, she successfully reclaimed her narrative. Walking away from toxic blood ties isn't a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. You alone define your success. If you found strength in this story of reclaiming independence, hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering tales of overcoming toxic family dynamics.